Hundreds in Gaza, including senior Hamas officials, are dead as Israel declares an end to the ceasefire. Short-lived as it was, the pause in hostilities allowed crucial humanitarian aid into Gaza. That has now stopped, with Israel escalating airstrikes and threatening more military action to come. Ankara describes it as a new phase of genocide policy. But can anything stop the destruction? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the war on Gaza. Well, it's becoming harder and harder to envision how the war on Gaza could ever end if only one part of a three-phase ceasefire plan was enacted after a year of negotiations. Now, the UN says the latest airstrikes add tragedy onto tragedy. And again, many will consider them war crimes. But as long as Israel has the full support, even encouragement of the United States, they likely won't stop. Now, their timing coincides as well with a new stage of Israeli political infighting, which some suspect helped lead Benjamin Netanyahu to relaunch his assault on Gaza. Here's a look.
A fragile ceasefire shattered. Israel targeting Gaza in a barrage of airstrikes, hitting dozens of targets in the early hours of the morning. Over 400 people dead, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry.
Around 2:10 in the morning, people were getting ready for suhoor meal. We saw rockets being fired on the area you see now. A lot of people were injured and a lot of people were killed in this area, and the ambulance came. And here we are, searching under the rubble to see if we can find people with our hands. As you can see, we search to see if we can find some of our neighbors or something.
A statement on X from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the Palestinian group Hamas of failing to budge in negotiations for the release of more Israeli hostages in ceasefire talks that had begun 6 weeks earlier. Israel's armed forces, according to the Post, were instructed to attack a series of Hamas targets across the Gaza Strip. But Palestinian authorities and hospitals say many children were killed in the attacks. Palestinians are voicing their despair.
We had hoped that the war would stop and that facing these disasters would end. But I see that the war has returned again. I don't know what to tell you. God will stand with us. What will we do? What is happening to us is hell. Hell in every sense of the word.
Hamas views the attack as a unilateral Israeli cancellation of the ceasefire. In a statement, it said Netanyahu and his government were fully responsible and labelled them Nazi Zionists. Their demands: mediators must hold Netanyahu and Israel solely responsible for violating previous ceasefire agreements, and called on the United Nations and the Security Council to force a halt in the aggression. The strikes come amid further political upheaval in Israel. On Sunday, Israel's Prime Minister announced he was going to ask the government to sack Ronen Bar, the head of Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency.
I have had an ongoing lack of trust in the head of the Shin Bet, a distrust that has only grown over time. Due to ongoing lack of trust, I have decided to bring a proposal to the government to end the tenure of the head of the Shin Bet.
Netanyahu widely believes intelligence failings at Shin Bet were responsible for Israel being caught unaware and unprepared for the attacks on October 7, when Hamas operatives stormed out of Gaza, killing over 1,000 and taking 251 people hostage. The move to sack his internal security chief received condemnation from Israel's opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who said it was purely to sabotage a criminal investigation into state security offences committed in the Prime Minister's office. In the backdrop, a frustrated Israel grows impatient with Netanyahu's slow progress in bringing the remaining hostages home. And with the ceasefire effectively over, that will almost certainly mean many more missiles, airstrikes, and deaths in Gaza.
So, to what end can this assault continue? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from London, historian and activist Haim Bresheeth. Also from London, Associate Fellow with Chatham House MENA Programme, Zizette Darkazally. And from Birmingham in the UK, Palestinian analyst and founding member of the British Palestinian Committee, Kamel Hawwash. Thanks all so much for being with me. Zizette, I will begin with you, because to resume airstrikes so aggressively, we now have hundreds more killed. What does it say to you about what Benjamin Netanyahu is really after here, and will he get it through military means?
Well, thank you, Andrea, for having me on the program. Look, this is the biggest assault, the biggest attack on Gaza since the ceasefire has got into effect on the 19th of January. I was talking to someone in Gaza this morning who said that they have felt that hell has broken loose, literally, when they heard the bombardment this morning. The scale and timing of the attack suggests that it goes beyond just sending a message to Hamas and beyond just a reaction to Hamas not agreeing to extending the ceasefire as per what Israel is saying. The timing and the scale suggest that it's very much tied into the domestic dynamics inside Israel at the moment. Prime Minister Netanyahu is supposed to have a court session today. And there's also the firing of the head of the General Security Services in Israel, which was supposed to be causing also leading to demonstrations today in Israel. So it seems like this assault, this attack, is kind of a distraction from what's happening. It's PM Netanyahu's way to distract from the domestic debate inside Israel at the moment that jeopardized his political career. And just whether he's going to get it or not, I think the past 18 months has shown that hostage release happens only through negotiations and not through military assault.
Right. But I mean, if this is an effort on behalf of the Israeli government to distract from what is happening domestically, does it look to you, Zizette, like it has been coordinated with the United States? Because we know Witkoff actually said what was happening with the bombings of the U.S. on the Houthis in Yemen was to be a warning to Hamas in advance of this Israeli aggression. So is there coordination as well then with the U.S. helping Netanyahu to make this distraction?
There has been reports that the U.S. was consulted on these attacks. As far as I know, the reports haven't been confirmed yet. But what I can tell you is that the unpredictability of the United States since the last administrations have come to power suggests that there is some kind of a policy to go to the extreme in terms of power and in terms of positions in order to try and move the stalemate on the different fronts. So whether it's linked to Yemen or not, it can be linked to the Yemen, to the whole approach of the United States of wanting to weaken the so-called axis of resistance. So it could be linked to that. But then at the same time, it does contradict the American president's statements that he wants to end the war in Gaza and his proposals, whether they're justified or not, but his proposals to end the war and achieve peace in the region. So there is a bit of confusion, and it's not clear at the moment where the policy is going.
Right. So, Haim, let me ask you if you agree with Zizette there. And also, if you do, what would happen to Netanyahu without this distraction of a resumption of hostilities?
Well, first of all, I think that Netanyahu definitely got the go-ahead from Trump. I know this is not, this was not said clearly by the American administration. But they have been using the language of the gates of hell and finish off everyone and so on for, since Trump came to power. And he never said that he will not support Israel to the hilt. He said the opposite. So I have no doubt that the attack on Yemen and the attack on Gaza are synchronized in the discussions between the two sides. Netanyahu, in a sense, doesn't have a choice. The ground is now shifting under his feet in Israel. Israel is now, in a sense, facing, a civil war. This is now a possibility and even a likelihood, as he got rid of a number of security leaders in Israel over the last week and appointed, in the case of the chief of staff, someone who is very pliable and will do exactly what Netanyahu tells him to do, while the leaving chief of staff was a bit more difficult to navigate. So I think Netanyahu feels that if he stops the war, his control will come to an end.
Right.
And in a sense, he now went for a war forever. The soldiers were told that this will take at least a year and maybe 3 years. I have no doubt that that's what he intends to do.
Let me ask you quickly, Haim, though. You say this is almost an Israeli civil war. Is it an Israeli civil war as most would define civil war, or just severe political infighting? Or are you actually saying that it will encompass the Israeli public?
I think it will encompass the Israeli public, not because they will fight on the side of Gaza, of course, because they all seem to be in agreement with the war on Gaza and other so-called enemies. But half of the Israeli public is opposing Netanyahu and also opposing the attack on Gaza because it will jeopardize the return of those still held by Hamas and other organizations in Gaza. And they understand that what Netanyahu is doing is complicating their life for the next few years and maybe for decades if Israel will actually exist that long.
Okay. Kamel, let me come to you. And let's look, please, at Gaza and Hamas now, because we've actually heard that Mahmoud Abu Watfa, who was the head of Hamas's interior ministry, and another senior figure were actually killed overnight. Hamas has lost many of its leading members, but it's still there. So how much does this change? Is Hamas still strong? In that sense, is Netanyahu actually strengthening the exact entity he's trying to eliminate?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's agree on a number of things. One, this is not self-defense. That expired long ago. Two, this is Israel's war against the Palestinian people. He talks about targeting Hamas, and it might have been that one of the leaders or more than one have been killed. But they have no regard for the Palestinian civilians who have also died in the process. I think that ultimately what Netanyahu is now going for is the complete destruction of Gaza, which they say something like 70 to 80% has been destroyed. He would like it to be all destroyed. He will then want the Palestinians to think about leaving. And that's when Trump comes in with his plan to make this a fantastic tourism area. The Palestinians are strong and they will not leave. But I think he's pushing and pushing at that aspect. Some people say he's doing this to put more pressure on Hamas. Of course it is, but it's really on the Palestinians to make their choice. There's no doubt that the Palestinian factions in Gaza have shown that they are still there. They are still in charge in terms of the running of the area as much as they can, and that they still have enough weapons to feel that they can hurt Israel again. And I must also remind you in terms of facts that it is Israel that has breached the agreement that was signed. It was not Hamas. And this is even by Israeli security forces reckoning that it is Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants to, they've started to use this language of, we want to deliver on Trump's plan to have Gaza. I mean, this is really where it's at. And they are still talking to countries, I understand now, in East Africa, to take some Palestinians. So let's just be clear about where this is heading. What he cannot deal with is the fact that the Palestinians are so resilient, and they will not go, but he will continue to destroy Gaza completely to make their lives so unbearable, especially in the month of Ramadan, which shows you what this murderous state is about. It is about murder and about destruction. And if they think that doing this will result in them achieving peace, then they are deluded.
Zizette, you seem to want to interject there. Go ahead.
I just want to make 2 points, which I think are important in what's happening now. First of all, the ceasefire has been fragile from the go-ahead. It's been fragile from the 19th of January when it was actually signed and when it came into effect. If you remember at the time, the Israeli officials were saying that they do not think it's going to hold. There have been Knesset members within the Israeli government that said that one resigned and one threatened to resign as well. There was also the attacks on the West Bank that started immediately after the ceasefire went into effect. So the ceasefire has been fragile from the very beginning. What I wanted to say about this is that it seems that the Israeli government approached the ceasefire as only a hostage prisoners exchange deal without the other components that should have came with it, i.e. increasing the humanitarian aid, the withdrawal from Gaza, withdrawal of Israeli from Gaza, and the other components that went to the ceasefire. So I think the reconstruction of Gaza, obviously. So I think this is one thing to keep an eye on, to remember. The second thing I wanted to say, for your question to Kamel earlier, is about who is Israel targeting in this strike. I think we can see now that Israel is also targeting the government in Gaza, the governance echelon layer in Gaza, not only the military leaders, because the people that have been killed in this strike are in charge of governance. So you can see that also now the infrastructure of the government in Gaza is being targeted. And to add that this attack came after 2 weeks of cutting of humanitarian aid, of electricity. So it didn't come after kind of the ceasefire was smoothly being implemented. There were actually violations before, and this one just culminated the whole speculations of whether it's going to collapse or not.
Okay. Haim, let me ask you, because Kamel had said we can all see where this is heading. We can definitely envision further destruction of Gaza, but where it ultimately ends is what? We have to be honest, I don't think anyone truly believes Trump will get his tourism development in Gaza. Netanyahu cannot eliminate the entire population of Gazan people. I mean, many argue he can never actually eliminate Hamas. But what do you see closer to what the end game could be in committing these types of war crimes in this aggression here?
I don't think Israel has an end game apart from emptying Palestine from its indigenous population. That's the end game all Israelis seem to be backing now, and not just now, but for a long time. Israel has conducted more war crimes than any other state, and indeed any groups of other states in the West or elsewhere. There was never any sanction applied to Israel since 1948. This is think of a Midwest town where a shootist is killing people in the marketplace. It's all surrounded by police, but instead of arresting the shooter, they're actually supplying him with more guns and ammunition. This is the situation we have here. The West is making sure that this is going on without any problems for Israel. This is not a war of Israel against Palestine. This is a war of the West against Palestine, and the script is written by Israel, and the war is actually enacted by Israel. But this is the whole West which is responsible for what is happening.
Haim, quickly, I mean, you say there have been no sanctions on Israel, but the ICC did issue an arrest warrant on Netanyahu. We saw how the U.S. responded to that as well under Trump. But does he have any fear whatsoever? Is there any precautions he's taking to try and mitigate what eventual charges could be, what could be enforced, perhaps even if it's in 4 years' time when Trump is out of office? Does he have any fear in that respect?
No, he doesn't have any fear. The Americans, some senators even suggested that they will bomb the ICC. And of course, the sanctions, the only sanctions that we know about, were actually enacted against the ICC itself by the US. So actually, there is nothing. These are not sanctions. Arrest warrants that cannot be enforced are not sanctions. Sanctions are what the West has done to Russia within a week of its war on Ukraine. Nothing like this has ever been enacted against Israel, and it is totally unlikely to be in the current UN situation and in the current situation in the West. The whole of Europe and the rest of the Anglophone West is supporting Israel to the hilt, including Britain, where we are speaking from London. London is still supplying the genocide with arms. I think that's how we should look at it. And I think that's where this change must happen. Israel should be ejected from the UN like South Africa was in 1974. Without that, there will be no end to Zionism, no end to genocide, and no end to the damage all over the Middle East.
Okay, Kamel, let me ask you, though, I'm sure you agree that, yes, the West is a great enabler of Israel, and particularly the U.S. in this war. But as we were talking about earlier, and you didn't get to comment on, the United States is now, for example, bombing the Houthis again in Yemen. And the Houthis have absolutely vowed to retaliate. Now, they might not have the military power, but they do have certain means to destabilize. And the fear now is that there will be a broadening of this war. So could this effectively be Trump starting the war that he pledged never to start, as more and more players get more desperate to take whatever action possible to try to protect Palestinians?
Well, what Israel wants is this to extend to Iran, i.e., yes, the Houthis are being bombed at the moment, or the Yemeni people. Again, the ferocity of these attacks are such that although the US has lots of targeted weapons or targeting weapons, it seems it doesn't matter how many people die. And I do think it's about Iran. Netanyahu, for decades now, has been talking about Iran and attacking Iran. He wants to do it with the United States. And yes, Trump prefers not to have wars, but I think now that he's had a go at the Houthis, Netanyahu will be inciting for the US to now go for Iran, because this axis of resistance has been much weakened, and that would be the thing to do. Trump still talks about eliminating Iran's nuclear facilities to stop nuclear weapons being obtained. And so I think that we're not looking forward in 2025 to a stable period of government by Trump, because he doesn't actually see any good in the United Nations, except that in the Security Council, the US has a veto.
They can block.
Otherwise, both Israel and America would leave if they didn't. The US didn't have a veto. They don't have it anywhere else.
Okay.
They've withdrawn from the Human Rights Council, for example. So I do think that we're looking to a really destabilizing period.
Okay. Zizette, I can give you one last minute for your final thoughts.
I just want to highlight that even if the Israeli government and other actors are sidelining international law, that does not mean that international law is irrelevant or should be sidelined. You mentioned the ICC. I want to add also the ICJ opinion, the International Court of Justice opinion as well, about how the occupation must end. And that leads me to my final thought, which is, as long as the root of the problem is not addressed, which is occupation, then unfortunately we're going to be seeing much more cycles of violence coming over and over again. And that should be now what all actors should be all come together to address, which is the root of the problem, which is Israeli occupation of Palestinian land.
Okay, Zizette, that will have to be the final word. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers, so I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with me. Greatly appreciated. And our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.